Saddam. His name's Saddam. Oh, that's real good, Bruce. Yeah, I'm gonna pin a medal on an Iraqi named Saddam.
Give yourself a raise, will you?
This is the quote that District Attorney Rick Cabot said to his assistant, Bruce. For context, here's what was happening shortly before this moment. Rick has arrived home with his wife, Karen. Previously, they were carjacked by two black men. Rick is worried that the aftermath of the crime will ruin his vote in the upcoming election. He runs this issue by his assistants, Karen and Bruce. Rick then gets the idea to give the medal to a certain firefighter, who is a man of color, to draw attention away from the carjacking. Bruce corrects Rick's assumption of the firefighter being black, stating that he's Iraqi. Bruce also says that the firefighter's name is Saddam Hasif. Rick then says this quote in response. There are two key ways that this quote is valuable to the storyline. One, the quote emphasizes the time period of the movie. Crash takes place shortly after 9/11, in LA, where racial tensions are high. There's especially prejudice towards those who are Middle Eastern, like this firefighter. Rick doesn't mind giving a medal to a black man, but he does mind giving one to Saddam, because of that. Even worse, Saddam also happens to be the name of the president of Iraq at the time, Saddam Hussein. Hussein was a brutal dictator rumored to have ties to Al-Qaeda. Rick is aghast at the thought of giving a medal to a man that has all these connotations of being a terrorist. 2. The quote also provides insight into Rick's character. Rick prizes his image so much that he would not give a medal to a man deserving of it, due to the racially related backlash it could cause. This trait of his comes into play later on in the movie, in which he has to give a statement on the shooting of a black police officer. In the movie, the circumstances of the incident are unknown. No one knows whether the white cop shot Lewis based on his race, or whether Lewis aggravated him or committed a crime. However, the former situation is a lot more common in society and also more believed. Rick knows that he would receive backlash from the black community if he states that the crime was Lewis's fault. To be racially sensitive, he informs the public that it was the white cop's fault, without actually knowing the truth.
Before I get to why we're here, I know that many of you have heard that we had our car stolen last night. And as you could imagine, my wife and I are both pretty shaken up, but we're okay. And Gene and I truly appreciate all your calls and your concern. Thank you. Now, just after 9 p.m. last night, Detective William Lewis, an 8-year veteran of the force and an active member of the black community, was gunned down by a fellow officer.
Interestingly enough, the history of Iraq-U.S. relations can give us a bit of background on this quote. The United States has been a part of Middle Eastern affairs since as early as the 1830s, when Christian missionaries built schools and hospitals in the area. During this time, countries like Iraq saw America as benevolent in comparison to Britain and France, who meddled with the governments and borders of Middle Eastern countries. U.S.-Iraqi relations soured with the advent of Saddam Hussein, fifth president of Iraq in the 1980s. Hussein has been described as a brutal dictator due to his uses of human torture and chemical weaponry during his regime. He was also distinctly anti-American. Hussein's Iraq invaded Kuwait, causing the Gulf War in 1990. This war resulted in little American casualties, but many civilian Iraq deaths due to the U.S.'s use of bomb strikes. The U.S. resolved to overthrow Hussein and started the Iraq War in 2003. The U.S. believed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, which was their cause to invade. There were around 5,000 American deaths. Then, the 9/11 attacks happened, performed by Al-Qaeda, a terrorist group who have allied themselves with Iraq in the past. 9/11 has kept the U.S. in a state of national emergency since 2001. So, the people of the U.S. have many reasons to dislike those from Iraq. Many had their family members go off to fight in either war, or had some who died in the 9/11 attacks. Others know of Iraq's shaky internal politics, and remember its vicious leader Saddam Hussein, which skews their image of the typical Iraqi. Either way, the history helps explain why Rick said this quote. We can also look at this quote a little more in depth using social science theories. This quote relates to conflict theory, as it signifies conflict between groups, specifically people of color and white people. Conflict theory states that while all groups fight for power, Some groups have more power than others. These groups aim to keep the status quo. Rick, as a white man, is a part of this ruling group. The status quo for the majority of America after 9/11 was to be fearful and hateful towards those who were Muslim, Middle Eastern, or even just brown. Rick keeps the status quo by refusing to show appreciation for a man who falls into these groups. If he does the opposite, he risks his power as a white man and as a district attorney. This quote also relates to the nature versus nurture theory. This firefighter, Saddam Hassif, has shown himself to be the opposite of a terrorist. Instead of taking, he saved lives. Yet in the eyes of the public, he is relegated to the color of his skin and the country he was born in. Since he looks like what they believe a terrorist is, that is what he will be to them. They, including Rick, believe in nature more than they do nurture. Unfortunately, racism towards Middle Easterners, and by relation Islamophobia, is still present today. After the September 11 attacks, President George W. Bush declared a military campaign called the War on Terror. Its goal, in simple terms, was to find and defeat every terrorist group existent worldwide. Just from that, you can tell that it's a large-scale plan. So large, in fact, the War on Terror technically continues today. Bush started this campaign to dissolve Al-Qaeda, the group that claimed responsibility for 9/11. Immediately afterwards, the U.S. sent troops to the Middle East, where Al-Qaeda is based. They bombed suspected hideouts, they captured and interrogated suspected members, but in particular, they sought to arrest Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda. Just like Saddam Hussein, bin Laden would act out of violence and publicly condemn the U.S. He also served the same purpose in that he gave Middle Easterners, and just dark-skinned Asian people in general, a bad name. As the War on Terror grew, it drew attention to the socio-political conflicts of the Middle East. This came with news coverage. According to the Islamic Networks Group, as of 2019, 80% of ABC and CBS and 60% of Fox coverage of Muslims is negative. In magazines and newspapers, subtle yet still Islamophobic titles were seen. Of course, they came with pictures and videos, and with those, people began to associate the sexism and radicalism of the terrorist groups with what they looked like: covered faces, dark skin, and that's how stereotypes began. And that's of course what we see is happening in Crash. Rick knows exactly what everyone will think of this firefighter when he draws attention to him. They'll think he's a terrorist.